little while to get started recording because I notice it cuts off right at the beginning. Okay. Hi, Rick. How are you this week?
Oh, I'm good, Carl. How are you?
I'm excellent. Rick, well, everybody's wondering, all our massive audience out there is wondering why we didn't record last week and post on Monday. So what happened?
Well, let's just say my wife decided to back into the side of the house and knocked our power off. And rather than, kind of stop, she said, oops, and then went and did the rest of her errands. And we basically had no power for the rest of the day. And she came back several hours later. She goes, oh, yeah, the power's off. Yeah, I kind of knocked the meter off the side of the house. And so, yeah, gee, thanks, dear.
The worst thing about that is the cold showers if you run out of hot water. It's painful.
Worst thing was we had an awesome discussion last week, and
Yeah, we did.
unfortunately got lost because of the power outage.
I know, I know. I was looking at the screen and you were really still for like 2 minutes. I was like, he's really focused. Anyway, we're back and we're going to talk about exactly what we spoke about last week and get more into it because we've had a whole week to think about it. So Rick, you shared an article with me from the New York Times, and this was very interesting because it's specific about what effect AI is having on employees like us and certainly risk managers. And this is how it goes. So there's a researcher out there, and we'll post this in the description so people can read it for themselves. Testing how ChatGPT affects the work of elite business consultants, right? So knowledge workers. And in the study, they brought in a bunch of these consultants and they gave them a 2-hour task, and it ended up taking them 20 minutes using ChatGPT, which is phenomenal. And the assumption is that these guys are going to be, guys and girls are going to be really knocked back and impressed and going to want to use AI and ChatGPT for everything. They weren't. They felt uneasy. They felt a threatened sense of themselves as high skilled workers. They even mentioned that it felt like empty calories for their brain, which I find really interesting. Um, what are your first impressions of this? Why did they feel so cornered?
Well, uh, I'm seeing this in a lot of areas. Okay, uh, there's been a huge rise in the imposter syndrome. And I want to take this a little bit out of what seems out of context at first. So, ironically, at the beginning of COVID, at the very beginning of COVID, I was running an exec ed class. I was teaching an exec ed class over a period of time. And uh, it was very weird. I noticed literally immediately once COVID hit and we went into lockdown and people were no longer going into the office every day, it struck people in a very different way. Now, not just to worry about COVIDs and, how am I going to take care of my kids, et cetera, et cetera. There's those stressors and, how am I going to deal with my elderly parents, et cetera, et cetera. Those stressors were obviously there and all the usual stressors. But all of a sudden, you were no longer at the office, and yet still your organization continued to exist. Uh, you realized that you were working in the initial stages at best 10% of your normal efficiency, but yet still your organization existed. And that led to a huge imposter syndrome. Okay. That was probably more stressful than all the other stresses that the pandemic brought on combined, in my opinion. And of course, the higher the level, the professional, and the more of a knowledge worker they were, the more this effect seemed to kick in. Now, I did not do a formal study of it. This is just anecdotal, but talking to other professionals, and professors who were doing similar things, they saw the same thing. And with ChatGPT and AI, all of a sudden, when that comes into play, you realize, holy smokes, it can do a lot of what I can do.
Mm.
And probably a lot of listeners to this right now are saying, listen, can we just get a ChatGPT in for Rick Nason's into this podcast? But when you realize that you can be replaced, perhaps not in whole, but even in part,
Yeah.
that is a huge blow to a professional who is defined by what they do. And again, ironically, and I think that we're going to talk later about the flip side of this and how there is cause for optimism here. But right now, at first blush, ironically, the more highly trained you are, the more educated, the more certified, that effect actually becomes bigger in my experiences.
Yeah.
Holy smokes, I went to school for all these years. I did all those exams, I'm invincible.
Right.
All of a sudden, ChatGPT does it automatically. You're no longer invincible. And that
Yeah.
could be a big shock.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like a sunk cost fallacy. I've invested so much of myself in this,
Yeah. So, over the past year, I've given several industry presentations on AI and the professional workforce. Uh, and in the audience, you can almost sense them tensing up when I point out why relying on just their technical knowledge is not going to cut it. Because ironically, the technical knowledge, AI is more or less going to beat you. Perhaps not today, but somewhere's down the road. And in the audience, you can kind of see them, immediately stiffen up and, get ready to attack. And, no, that's not going to happen to me, And, uh, but there is a flip side to that I think is even more positive. But
Yeah, yeah. Let's get into that. So this researcher expanded the study to find out more, um, and I think he gave two different tasks. One was a creative, more brainstorming session, and ChatGPT combined with these consultants that were being studied did fabulous. They actually produced better quality work than the base case of not using ChatGPT. Okay, fine. But there was a second type of work that they looked at, and this was analytical work. And just quickly, that's critical thinking skills. It's laying out evidence for an opinion that you have. It's a little goes a little deeper than the other type. So what happened here is they had three different groups. They had a group that didn't use any ChatGPT whatsoever. They had a group that was trained in ChatGPT and used it to produce a result. And they had a group that used ChatGPT but had absolutely no training in it. And fast forward, the results for the analytical task were that the group that did not use any ChatGPT was the best. They gave the best answers to this, and it's an analytical task, so it's a bit more objective than the creative brainstorming one. The second highest was not the group that used AI and had been trained in it. It was the group that used AI but had zero training in it. And I'll tell you in a few minutes what the researcher's explanation for this is. And the absolute back of the bus was used AI and which was trained in it, in how to use it. They came last in an analytical task. Rick, first impressions. What do you think of that?
uh, first off, for the first and third groups, I am not at all surprised. Okay, I'm slightly surprised. I would have thought that your group two, the one that didn't have the training in AI but used it, would have done better. Okay, I'm a little surprised by that. For the group that's trained in AI, I would have a priori said that they would have done worse, because this comes back to, and I don't mean to beat a dead horse and or have everything be a complexity nail and I got a complexity hammer. But a lot of analytical tasks have parts that are complicated and parts that are complex. We have to remember that AI, by definition, can only work with complicated issues. It cannot do complex issues
Can you
by
explain that?
definition.
Can you explain that a little bit for viewers? What is complicated and what is complex?
Complicated are things that work by rules and laws. Complex are issues where you have agents, i.e., people who can interact, i.e., communicate in some way, shape, or form, and who can adapt.
Okay.
And it's basically the difference between studying physics and studying sociology. Okay, you can't practice sociology like a physicist. Likewise, you can't practice physics like a sociologist. And most analytical issues in business have parts that are complicated and parts that are complex. And for those that know systems theory, yes, there's other types of systems in there, but for the most part, it's complicated and complex. AI can only deal with complicated. And so when you give someone a tool like a hammer, everything becomes a nail and you ignore all the screws. You ignore all the plastic fasteners. You ignore the glue. You ignore the fact that you can just have people hold up what you want to be together for a while. And so I'm not at all surprised by the fact that people trained in AI used it, because we automatically default to what we at first blush believe to be um, the easiest path forward or the
Yeah.
most efficient path forward. And, you know, for an analytical issue, that's simply not going to cut it.
Yeah. Well,
Now, we have to be careful about how we define analytical. If it's, a purely mathematical issue, then yeah, the results would be reversed.
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what the researcher said. The comments that the last placed group made were what it looked so right. The AI, the ChatGPT responses, the solutions, they looked correct. They appeared correct. They fully trusted them because they had been trained in using ChatGPT, and ChatGPT gave them a very convincing answer, and they didn't question. The second group that hadn't been trained questioned. They mixed a bit of intuition with ChatGPT, and they said, well, does this make sense? But that was completely turned off for the first group. It's a little like that old story of a guy walking down the street sees somebody looking under a lamppost, at night, obviously. And he asks, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm looking for my keys." And he asks, "Did you lose them over here?" And he says, "No, but there's only light over here."
Yep.
Yeah, it's the same as your hammer analogy, really. But yeah, that's really interesting, and that gives risk managers and other knowledge professionals hope, because there are certain tasks out there that ChatGPT cannot manage now. Possibly it can get better at them in the future. We're not sure, but yeah, there are complex tasks out there that risk managers can still excel at and build a career out of.
And there's also, I would just like to point out, and here, this is probably a full discussion for another time. Going
Mm.
back to 2008 and the financial crisis in 2008, the other thing that AI cannot deal with is a paradigm shift. And in 2008, everyone said that the modelers were crappy modelers. They weren't crappy modelers. It's simply econometrics and AI does not work on a paradigm shift. And we had a paradigm shift in de facto 2006, 2007 that manifested itself in 2008. So
Yeah.
AI can also not deal with a paradigm shift. And the irony is AI itself is a paradigm shift. And so we kind of have paradigm shift squared here, that as risk managers, I believe that we have to think even more as AI becomes more prominent in our field.
Yeah, question those assumptions. I just want to say one last thing, because I know we have an audience who are early in their careers, or maybe even haven't started a career yet and are finishing up master's programs and bachelor's degrees. Um, and also I'm judging a case competition later this year, and we're allowing AI. So it's going to be really interesting. But my point is that ChatGPT AI can help you with some of the tasks that you need to do to get ready for an interview, to learn certain concepts. It's being used as a tutor, which I think is pretty smart. It can't do the interview for you. It can't deliver the results. It can't present the case competition to the judges convincingly for you. There's still things that you need practice at, that come from working in a team environment, connecting dots, complex tasks. There's still plenty of stuff that humans are way better at than ChatGPT, so we mustn't lose hope. There's plenty for us.
There most definitely is. And just along that lines, I'd like to give a shout out to Daniel Pink's book, A Whole New Mind, because that's a book that's written on your last comment. And it's the title of the book is A Whole New Mind, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the Future, which is, I believe, very accurate in AI, because AI is going to take over many of our left-brained tasks, while as risk and as risk managers, as we go through school, we're trained very carefully on these basically quantitative tools, but it's actually the qualitative aspects that we'll specialize in. And we'll probably in a future podcast, we should talk about the Bainbridge study that says that the greater the amount of automation, the greater the need for a higher caliber thinking human.
Yeah.
And I think that's the flip side of all of this. The automation brought on by AI, great tool, but the more it becomes integrated into various fields, including risk management, the more we're really going to have to put on our thinking caps as risk managers.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay, we'll add a note about that book in the description if people are interested. And yeah, there's plenty of exciting future topics for us to discuss. Well, Rick, thank you as always, and we will speak to you very shortly.
Sounds good. Take care, Carl. Have fun.